Yesterday, we finished the third chapter of Bikkurim, which really concludes the order of Zeraim and the material of Bikkurim. And today we're going to start the fourth chapter, which is an extra. It's not in some manuscripts of the Mishnah. The Rambam's commentary doesn't cover it. Actually, it's not in the Jerusalem Talmud. So it's clearly an add-on. There are some chapters of Mishnah like this, by the way. The last chapter of Sota is an add-on, although I think an add-on early on in the Mishnah. But this is clearly a late add-on. However, it is covered in the daily Mishnah calendar. So we are going to cover it. And it's very interesting. It's a throwback to a discussion on classification and analysis that we dealt with when we looked at the koi. Do you remember the koi, the animal that was neither wild nor domesticated? We dealt with it in the second chapter. And the Mishnah said, koi, yesh bo drachim shaveh lachaya v'yesh bo drachim shaveh labehema. A koi has aspects like a wild animal and aspects like a domesticated animal, and then aspects like both a wild and a domestic animal, and aspects which are neither like a wild nor like a domestic animal. And this Mishnah, which introduced the taxonomy, then preceded a string of Mishnayot, which then explained in detail the characteristics of the koi along those lines. Have a look now at the first Mishnah in chapter 4. Androgynous, a hermaphrodite. Yesh bo drachim shaveh anashim v'yesh bo drachim shaveh anashim, is in some ways like men and in some ways like women. V'yesh bo drachim shaveh anashim v'nashim, and in some ways like men and women. And in some ways he's like neither men nor women. It's an absolute parallel. In fact, this Mishnah and the Mishnayot which accompanied, in fact, appear in the Tosefta of the second chapter of Bikkurim. So in other words, they originate from the Tosefta of Bikkurim. The Tosefta is, Tosefet means add-on. And the Tosefta is Mishnaic material which somehow didn't make it into the redaction of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, but it absolutely dates from the time of the Mishnah. Very often it runs in parallel, but at a distance from the Mishnah, and very often the Talmud will quote from the Tosefta to illustrate a Mishnah. So the Tosefta, in other words, it's a close parallel to the Mishnah, but it's generally excluded from it. This Mishnah and the ones that follow it are found in the Tosefta in the second chapter of Bikkurim. So the first Mishnah lays out the taxonomy. Now we're going to look at some examples. I should say, by the way, that in general, the text we're following follows the Munich manuscript, which is another good manuscript. I've just seen various printed texts around, and I'm just not sure which to choose, but I need to choose one in order to teach from to be consistent. So I've pretty much taken the Munich manuscript, although with some slight variations from Sephara, which I didn't have time to get rid of. Keitzad shaveh anashim, how is he like men? Matameh belovan kanashim, a white discharge causes impurity, creates tumah for a man. It does not for a woman. So he causes impurity with white discharge like men. V'noseh aval lo nisa kanashim, he can marry, but he can't be married. So he can, and marriage, as it's described in Kiddushin, is an act in which if you like, the man takes the action. The man says to the woman, "Harei mekudashet." The man brings the woman into his domain, if you like. Obviously, she has to agree. If she doesn't, we've learned this before. If she doesn't agree, then the Kiddushin don't take. But it's an action by a man to a woman, and this Mishnah is saying that the hermaphrodite can noseh aval lo nisa, he can marry, but he can't be married like men. And he's obligated in all the mitzvot of the Torah like men. And that's very interesting as a statement of principle. I mean, some people are surprised that the Mishnah and the Talmud knows about gender fluidity at all. And we're going to see that the Talmud actually thinks about 4 types of sort of gender classifications: a man, a woman, an androgynous, who's has characteristics of both a man and a woman. And that's why there's lack of clarity about their status. And a tumtum who doesn't have sexual organs that are clearly either of a man or a woman. So those are the 4 classifications that the Talmud and the Mishnah know about. This is the first one. And because the androgynous, the hermaphrodite, has got sexual organs both for a man and for a woman, there is uncertainty. And so the Mishnah will now go on to say, in what way is he like a woman? Because in some ways he's like a man, but in some ways he's like a woman. Well, and again, this Mishnah is parallel to the one before, and we're going to say a red discharge causes impurity like women. So effectively, we're machmir. We're machmir. We apply both kinds of impurity to the hermaphrodite. And he can't be secluded with a man like women. In other words, the halachos of yichud apply to him as they would to a woman. He doesn't transgress the law of you shall not round and you shall not destroy. This is all about haircutting. You don't round, you can't destroy the corners of the beard or round off your haircut. These are halachot that only apply to men, but apparently don't apply to a hermaphrodite. And then ufasul minha edut ka nashim. This is very interesting. And we are really running up against core issues about masculinity and femininity here. That a woman is ineligible to give evidence. It's one of the big. I'm sure we'll touch on this at a later point in the Mishnah. I'm not. This is such a fundamental issue. I don't think we have time for it here, particularly. And we're saying that the hermaphrodite is also ineligible as a witness, just like a woman. Ufasul min ha'edud kanashim, ve'eino nival ba'avera kanashim. He can't. I have to say, I don't entirely understand, and I cannot figure out from the commentators what this remark means. He can't have illicit intercourse like a woman. Ufasul min hakuna kanashim, and he's ineligible for the priesthood like women. And the Bartanura actually connects, and there are some commentators who connect the text of these last 2 sayings to say that if he's raped, then he is ineligible to eat truma like a kohen, which would not be the case if he were a man. But the text is unclear, and I have to say the halacha is slightly unclear to me. I'm not quite sure what is going on here, and the different texts vary. But that's the summary of the first 3 Mishnayot and the beginning analysis of the status of the hermaphrodite. And then the next 2 Mishnayot, which close off the tractate, will just conclude this analysis.